Hello, everybody. I have a really amazing guest today here. I want to welcome Tad Williams for an interview. Tad, welcome. I greet you in front of the Croatian audience and Liburnicon. We're doing it a bit differently this year. You visited last year live, but this time we're doing it online because why not?
I hear you, and zdravo.
Wow.
Zdravo opatia. Lovely to be there even virtually. I had a great time last year, I have to say. That was one of the most entertaining and pleasurable convention experiences I've had. I think I said to several people, invite me back. I really want to come.
Okay,
so obviously this is not the best year for that, but I'm happy to be there in virtual space anyway.
Oh, that's so lovely to hear, especially from you. You are like visiting nonstop, so that's a great compliment.
It was a lovely convention, and the people were just great. I had such a nice time. I had to leave because I had to drive back to Zagreb that morning, so we had to actually leave at like 4 o'clock in the morning, and the gentleman from the con had to actually come and like grab me and take me away and say, you know, we actually have to start driving now. You know, we have time to just go back and grab your suitcases, but we got to go. It's a long way to Zagreb. So they had to drag me out basically.
Well, we will drag you back to Opatija, hopefully soon.
I hope so.
So basically, let's start the official part.
Yes.
You are such a incredible writer. You basically defined the genre. I was thinking about this. My generation basically grew up reading your books. It was like Tad Williams and everybody else. Even if you're not reading Tad, you know about him, you know about his books, and you are basically always being compared to everybody. Everybody else is being compared to you. So this is such a pleasure to have you here and to take a peek into your mind and your processes and your thoughts. Let's start from the beginning. I know this is a boring question. I keep reading about your beginnings, how you did odd jobs, how you dabbled in art and still are dabbling. And basically, this is very interesting to me. I'm an artist. At least I like to think so, since I finished music academy. So yeah, some say I might be an artist, and I like to dabble in many forms of art. I do it badly, but I like it.
If you feel like you're an artist, you probably are, because the confidence thing is one of the things all of us have to struggle with. And I actually, just quickly, I'll tell you, I had a thing where, because one of my best friends from school used to talk scornfully about all the people at his university who called themselves writers, but really were just like sitting in a coffee shop making notes and never actually did anything. I did not call myself a writer, like that's my job, until I was actually making a full-time living off of it, because he made me so nervous about that. It was like, I don't want to be a phony. I don't want to be one of those people claiming they're an artist, but they're not actually doing it. So I waited until that was my only income. And then I was able to finally say, after years, no, damn it, I am a writer. So don't let your confidence get undercut by, you know.
I will have to think about that. I think I can be a singer. I can be a writer. Oh, am I an artist? That's a good question. But let's go deeper into your art. You're definitely an artist, and you are so versatile in your artistic interests, especially music, which kind of interests me. So can you please tell me why writing? Why did writing win? Why?
That is one of those questions where, you know, you look back and you can see the patterns, but definitely could not at the time. When I first got out of school, or even in my last couple of years of school. And the difference for me from a lot of people is that, unlike all of my friends, I did not immediately go to a university after I graduated from what we call public school in America, which goes through age 18, high school. I'm sure you all know about high school, if nothing else from American television. So when I graduated from high school, I already felt very strongly that I didn't have a reason to go to university, because what I was really interested in was making one of my creative projects work. Now, I did go later on, but then I promptly dropped out, so that doesn't even really count. But so what was going on was, in my first few years after high school, I was pursuing a lot of those different interests. So I was playing in a band, I was doing theater, I was working as a kind of wannabe illustrator and cartoonist, doing ads for local stores and things like that, and just whatever I could do to try and make one of these things work. Writing actually came sort of more in my early 20s because, and this is where, you know, you look back and see these patterns, because I was having issues with trying to work with other people who weren't as, I don't want to say, they weren't as serious as I was. They weren't feeling the pressure that I was, because I had essentially rolled the dice on the idea that I'm going to make one of these creative things work. I hadn't started a backup plan. And by the time I was 24, I was married for the first time. So I didn't have kids or anything, but I definitely had like responsibilities. And more, I got very frustrated because, you know, the band, you were dependent on people showing up for rehearsal and taking it really seriously. And we had a lot of weird things happen, and theater and radio, which I was doing by that time. All of these things required some kind of connection with other people. Now, I love people, but I was the one who was like, I have to get this done. And everybody else was more, you know, hey, we're in our early 20s. We want to party. We want to do this. And to which I am very sympathetic, but I still had this thing. I was working, because I didn't go to college, I was working really lousy jobs to keep, you know, body and soul together, as we say. So, you know, I was coming home after my second job at night, or sometimes I had 3 jobs, and I was just starting to kind of start thinking about, what can I do in my own time where I don't have to rely on people? Because I've only got a few hours a day when I'm not working at one of these horrible jobs. And one of my apartment mates, we lived in what's called a 4-plex. So there was only 4 apartments. And one of the other people, so out of 4 apartments, one of the other people was a very fine writer named Ron Hansen, who's actually, you know, had a lot of very excellent books. He had a movie or 2 made from his work. And I got to know Ron, and I kind of started to think, you know, I could do that. And not only that, it would be something I could do whenever I was able to work. So I could come home at 2 o'clock from the restaurant where I was waiting tables, and I could work for a couple of hours, you know, and not have to worry about, oh, the drummer's girlfriend kicked him out and he's too depressed to practice, or, you know, that kind of nonsense. So that's really what happened. I wrote a screenplay for somebody I worked with at a radio station. Nothing came of that. I wrote another screenplay, which I basically ditched in a drawer. And then I wrote my first book, which was Tail Chaser's Song, the cat novel. And I was lucky enough within a few months to finally to sell it. And at that point I said, okay, well, I have a choice. I can either go back to college at this point, because I'd been accepted to Berkeley, or I can take advantage of this, you know, this opportunity. And that's really what I did at that point. I said, you know, I'm going to kind of put all my money on this, on black or on red, or, you know, whatever. I was going to roll the dice and go, okay, here, I'm going to try and write more books. And in the end, that worked out for me. I was lucky enough to be able to make a living, and still am making a living, which is really all I asked for. I wouldn't mind being rich, but I'm perfectly happy just to be able to make a living doing something that I love doing.
How does your other artistic preferences influence your writing? Because, you know, it's hard for an artist to just compartmentalize. Oh, that word is hard. To like keep the artistry separate. So how do you put it inside your books and your processes?
Well, it's almost impossible to keep it out, to be quite frank. And by the way, your English is excellent. So
Oh, thank you.
Don't fret about that. It creeps in everywhere. I notice in particular that music does, but I'll talk briefly about the visual stuff first. I think the earliest kind of art that I got interested in was visual art, was drawing and painting and things like that. So I've always had a very strong visual sense. I kind of feel that in terms of the arts, if I hadn't finally found writing, I might have been happy being in film or maybe even video games because of the visual side of them. And when I'm writing, I am very much a visualizer. I definitely want to have a feeling in my head of what I'm looking at, what it looks like, what the experience is visually. So oftentimes that will lead me into other kinds of explanations like weather and things like that, because I want to give the reader a very quick snapshot. Literally there, I'm even using another visual term there. I want to give the reader a quick snapshot and orient them and make them feel like, okay, I'm seeing what the character's seeing. So the visual side has always been very strong with me, and I think I use a lot of color words, for instance, because color has always been very strong for me. So when I'm describing things, and of course one of the foundations of science fiction and fantasy is trying to describe things that don't actually exist. So you have to make your descriptions fairly vivid while not being so vivid that the reader doesn't get to use their imagination. So I will tend to talk about things like color combinations. I remember, for instance, way back in the Dragonbone chair, I was talking about a magical struggle that was going on, and I didn't like the idea of sort of like Star Wars laser battle kind of thing, you know, so I was trying to explain what it felt like. But part of it was I was also inventing visuals that the reader would have to use their imagination, because I was talking about colors of light that were yellow and gray. And that, you know, that's not an easy thing. You don't just immediately see that in your head. You have to kind of start adjusting and playing with things. So I've always had that visual side to my work, and I think that's very much influenced it. But I would say even more music, and particularly a sort of a rhythmic sense of what works and what doesn't work. And one of the biggest struggles has been in all of my life, in my writing life, is trying to make the pace that I feel in my head work out through the complexities of actually telling the story and setting the scenes and describing the character's emotions and all those things that you need to do to tell a story, but that themselves kind of may dictate the pace or dictate when things need to happen. Then I have to contrast that with my own feeling of, no, I know there's nothing that I've planned to happen here, but it feels like something dramatic. There has to be a beat. Or in a particular scene, I'm going, it's time to stop thinking, and now it's time to feel this rhythm speed up somehow, you know? There's also a sense of what in, say, opera or composition called leitmotifs, you know, where things keep coming back in, where you do variations on themes. So the reader in this case, or the listener, if it's music, is hearing something familiar, but maybe this time it's been invested with a slight minor key, or, you know, or a kind of a repetition that lulls you so that you're surprised when it changes. All those kind of musical things. And I'm not an educated musical person, but I'm a lifelong, you know, listener and lover of music, and I've played music and things like that. And I have a lot of musician friends. So it's always been, I think, a strong part of me. But it's also, in some ways, it's the least conscious part of writing. And I oftentimes have to stop and say, why do I feel this needs to happen? And then I realize, okay, that's purely a musical reaction.
Music is intuitive. I mean, if anything, music is intuition and feeling.
Absolutely. And you're completely right. And music is also about space. And that's another, especially when you're writing big, long stories, it's important to remember that it cannot all be action. It cannot all be revelations. It cannot all be drama. And how do you do the musical equivalent of the space between notes? Well, that's usually other ways of storytelling.
Yeah, that's how musicians think. It's like, especially like singers, it's about the taking of the breath as well, how you inhale and exhale, as much as the pauses, which add all the drama and all the flavors sometimes, or all.
Absolutely. Or, you know, yeah, and not just singers, obviously. You look at, say,
Everybody.
You know, Eric Satie or somebody like that, and, you know, it's absolutely the spaces in the music that make the notes do what they do, you know, whereas if they were strung together in fast arpeggios, well, Satie does occasionally use fast arpeggios, but I mean, that's, you know, but that works differently. That propels the listener forward, whereas the slower things and the spaces are what makes them appreciate the resonance when the notes come, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, especially in writing, in words and sentences and longer thoughts. Yeah, I love this. This was great. So let's continue on to your reader. I've been like chatting with my friends who are longtime readers. Some have been reading you for decades, and just I was incredibly surprised, even shocked, just how much detail they retained from stuff they read like 20 years ago. So wow. They had this delightfully surprised moment, and my friend used that term, which was just incredible, how they remember certain scenes and emotions and stylistic, like things you did that impressed them, and they still remember it. It's such a rare sight to see, to be so immersed in a book that you remember it decades and you don't have to reread to remember. Who is your reader, and how do you communicate with your reader? Through your books, of course, through your writing.
I'm smiling because this is going to be such a ridiculous answer, but primarily my reader is me.
That was my next one.
And this
when do you become?
Yeah, this is one of the things that I have frequently said to up and coming writers, you know, people who are either wanting to become writers or they are, but they haven't, you know, they haven't reached their, you know, working stage yet, and haven't sold any, whatever, you know, the early stages. And one of the things I've frequently said is that it is crucial to realize that the only reader who you absolutely know how they feel about your book is yourself, because you know every bit of what works for you, what doesn't work for you, why you like the things you like, why certain things give you a weird shudder and others give you a pleasurable shudder, and you know, all that kind of stuff. When you're writing to an imaginary person, they are just that, they are imaginary. Whereas if you write the book that you want to read personally, then you know that you're at least on what one person wants. And then you hope there are more people like you. So, you know, I know what I like, and I like the fantastic, but with a sense of grounding. I like family and people drama, you know, that fascinates me. The interplay between people and the transmission of culture from generation to generation, all kinds of things like that fascinate me. I love history. I love science, and I like finding ways to fit science into fantasy, and not in the sense of making it literal, like it has to be this way, but in terms of trying to make it feel real. You know, knowing something about how the real world works means that when you make fantastic worlds or fantastic creatures or whatever, you're already thinking about them in a way of how can I make the reader feel this is absolutely happening. You know, I believe that this is, you know, genuine. So it's kind of a combination of all of those things that means that you can use yourself as, you know, as the barometer of whether you've done the job better than you can an imaginary reader, you know, like, oh, teenagers, or, you know, young Hispanic females, or, you know, I mean, some kind of abstract concept. You write for the book that you want to read, and then you pray, especially if you're a professional writer, you pray that there's enough other people who like the same things you do, but at least you know you've delivered the right thing for a reader like yourself. And since most writers start as readers, obviously, and love reading and love stories and books and things, there's a good chance there are some other people out there like you, but at least you have something to stay true to. You have an opinion of what's good fiction that you can access anytime, if that makes any sense.
It makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
How do you keep the passion alive? How do you keep the mojo going? So after all these years, how do you still find that creative freshness?
Well, I'm glad to say that one of the things I've discovered in my late middle age is that I need to do this. And that's reassuring because, there's a point of time when you get into the middle of a professional arts career of some kind where you do wonder, am I going to lose my love for this? And then what will happen? And that thought always terrified me because every project I think I've ever done, certainly everything that anybody has ever seen, because it's been published of mine, was based on the fact that I was in love with that idea when I was working on it. I was absolutely passionately attached to getting that story told or following those characters. So there was a part of me that went, God, once this is how you make a living, Tad, what are you going to do if, you get into the middle of a story and you're not enjoying it anymore? And that was very worrisome for me because that is, in fact, one of the things you have to be able to do to make the transition from somebody who's writing for pure love and somebody who's still writing from pure love, but also has to get books done so that your family doesn't starve and you don't have to eat your pets, stuff like that. Not that we generally eat pets here in the States, but you know what I mean? I mean, just, you need to keep the money coming in. It's an ugly fact, but we live in a capitalist society and, nobody has given me a free house and said, here, we love your contributions to the arts. So I have to keep writing stories. So that was the first thing. And I was very worried about it. But what I discovered was, in fact, because I can't take days off, I began to learn that, I'm doing this all the time. It's as much a part of me as loving my wife, loving my kids, enjoying our pets, it's a part of me. And I make stories, and that's what I do. And if I tell myself, I need a day off, Tad, you are not going to think about whatever, the Ostenard books or, within an hour of trying to just completely turn my brain off, I will be thinking of other stories. I will be like, something will happen on TV and I'll go like, oh, what if this, that, and before I know it, I'm planning out another damn story. And I don't really need any extra stories. I'm already several years behind on what I would like to write. So that was a huge realization. And it's not even love, although I do love what I do. It's more just that I am fortunate enough, and that, as I said, this is why paths look clearer looking back. I am fortunate enough, I realized, to have gotten involved with a career where, first of all, it suits a lot of my more private side, my more kind of, going off on my own to think side. But it also is something that I do naturally and always did do, even long before I realized that I was a storyteller. I was always a storyteller. And I can't stop doing it. So, in fact, what that means then is that all I have to do is just make sure I don't do any projects that I don't love, because I love telling stories. So as long as I'm working on things that I care about, it's entirely up to me to keep loving them by keep putting that energy into them and following the story that I wanted to tell. And I've never yet had one dump out on me partway through and suddenly become boring. And so I'm pretty sure now that I will probably be writing until whatever end happens, or they, freeze me or put me in a vat or whatever, or whatever happens, 20, 30 years up the line. So that's reassuring. So yeah, that's mainly where it comes from. I have to do it. I have to tell stories. I can't help thinking about things in terms of stories.
Yep, you're a storyteller. Let's look back a bit. Young Tad Williams as a writer and a more experienced one.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's the difference?
I would say the main difference is that I have been slowly moving to a slightly less ornate style. And I actually have had a few people write to me kind of wistfully and say, you don't seem to describe things in quite the amount of depth that you used to. And I think I've been doing a reading project lately where I've been reading on Sunday nights, reading old stories of mine. And at the moment I'm reading my first novel, live on the internet. And it is interesting because nothing makes me wince, thank God. Nothing makes me feel like, oh my God, what was I thinking? But occasionally I do say, that's an unnecessarily tricky word. And, that doesn't, that's more kind of, I'm trying to think of who I'm thinking of. Oh, that's like Franz Liszt, when I actually needed to be more like Mozart Lieder, right? I mean, to use a musical thing, right? Instead of being kind of sweet and melodic, when that's the best way to do, there's little moments there where I'd be showing off, kind of, in the sense of throwing in a word that in retrospect, 40 years on or 30 years on or whatever, I look at and go like, thank God it's a small enough thing to look at and say, I'd change that now. But I think in the overall thing, I've become more concerned with writing sentences that do not need a lot of fireworks, and saving the fireworks for times when I feel that the rhythm or the music of the piece calls for them, rather than my kind of earlier Charles Dickens-esque fascination with complicated sentences and arch irony and things like that, and also with words that go kaboom because they're exciting and unusual and stuff. And again, the older me is more concerned about distracting the reader from the flow of the story. But other than that, I don't think I've changed much. I like the same kinds of things. They were things that were formed in me primarily at an early age, like from almost infancy into adolescence, as is true with many people with the things that they love and care about. And, there's a direct route back to the children's books my mom read me when I was little. There's a direct route back to all the science fiction and fantasy and adventure stuff I fell in love with. And there's a direct route back to my discovery of, more mainstream, more accepted writers like Dickens and Jane Austen and people like that. There's a direct line to all those things in my work. And it actually resulted in my wife and I were talking about this. And my wife, Deborah Beale, is also a writer, but she was originally my British publisher. That's how we first met each other. And Deborah was talking to me about don't you ever worry? You don't read as much contemporary science fiction and fantasy. There's all these things happening in the field. And I actually thought about that for a while, because it's true. I don't read as much contemporary stuff as I feel I should. But then after a while, I realized, what's actually going on here is that the things that made me want to be a writer were already in place long before I became a writer. So I don't feel a need to keep up with the field in terms of changing my own style. I don't think I could. It's changing a little bit over time, but it's basically, I'm the same writer that I would have been if I had become a writer when I was 15. It took me a while to figure out how to do it. And I'm still figuring out how to do it. But nobody else could influence me at this point. And so I will read things when people go, oh, this is great, you should read it just because you'll enjoy it. But I'm not kind of following the field wondering, oh, what's happening now? Because I don't think I could change, I don't think I could change the writer that I am, no matter what.
Please don't change.
I am changing a little bit over time.
That's fine.
But I'm not. Yeah, I just say.
If you want to change. But yeah, it works.
No. But it's the changes that are happening are organic. They're
organic. That's the right word. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can see it between, the first Ostenard trilogy, the second Ostenard trilogy. There are some very strong through lines and kind of ways of writing and ways of thinking and feeling, I think, that are very similar. And not necessarily because I tried to do it that way. although that was in my mind, but mostly because I was working with the same characters and the same kind of story. But there are other things too. And you can see, especially like the first 2 or 3 chapters of the Dragonbone chair, it's much wordier. That was like one of the first things I had ever written. It literally was the first thing I'd ever written with the idea that it would be published, because I'd only ever written the cat book before that. So, you know, that's between that and the most recent one of the Ostenar books, you can see that there's been a change, but it's very much something that arose out of the material, not because I was influenced by seeing somebody else and going, oh, you know, that's really good, I should try and be more like that. It's kind of too late for that.
What are you currently reading?
What am I currently reading? Well, as always with me, I'm reading a huge amount of nonfiction, which tends to be kind of, as I get older, it becomes more dominant. And part of that is because fiction is oftentimes not that much of a vacation for me. Mm-hmm. You know, as I mentioned, I realized that I'm thinking about what I'm working on all the time. You know, just whether I'm actually sitting at a computer or not, I'm thinking all the time, either in the back of my mind or the foreground, about what I am doing. And so as a result, when I get to the end of a working day at, you know, 1 o'clock in the morning or whatever, whenever I kind of feel like I can officially quit thinking, the last thing I want to do most of the time is read somebody else's fiction, because that turns back on, you know, the writer side of me. And I start looking and guessing and criticizing and, you know, kind of editing in my head. Oh, I would have done that different. Oh, I bet you they're going here, you know. Whereas if I read nonfiction, not only is it worthwhile for my work, but it doesn't turn that critical switch on. Same thing, and it's even happening to me with film and television. You know, it drives my wife crazy, I think, because
it's hard to turn off the writer.
It's very hard, and it you know, it has been a long time now that it kind of, it's so wonderful for me when I see a film or a television thing that I can shut, or read a book, that can shut that off, and I can just be a reader or an audience member again and just enjoy it and not have this little voice in the back of my head saying, well, they should have done this. Why didn't they do that? You know, these like voices. As far as what I'm reading, other than nonfiction stuff, I am reading Hilary Mantel's third book about Thomas Cromwell, which I'm actually having a little trouble getting through, not because it's not brilliant, it is, but because I know what happens, because I'm a history buff, and I know it's a sad ending, and I so like her idea of who Thomas Cromwell. I have no idea if the real Thomas Cromwell, I mean, it's hard to tell from history what he was actually thinking, but her version of him is so brilliant. And I know that he's going to be executed at the end of it, because that's what happened to Thomas Cromwell. He, you know, he rode the dragon for a long time, but then, as often happens when you partner up with maniacs and despots, you know, he finally slipped off. So but anyway, so I'm reading that. I'm rereading some old familiar stuff. I actually was just reading, last couple days, I was feeling like I needed a break. So I was reading Alison Bechdel's Fun Home, which is a, you know, comic about her childhood and her very messed up father and her journey into coming out as a lesbian and things like that. And comics tend to sneak under the radar, no matter how well written. I don't, even though I grew up on comics and I love comics and I've written comics, I don't feel the same strong urge to critique in my head. So that's a kind of a way to escape from that a little bit. And then, you know, my usual stuff that I'm just kind of rolling through, which is often old stuff of mine, but it's also, you know, whatever suits the mood, usually of what I'm working on, unfortunately. I'm getting really boring.
No, you're not. You're the first reader.
As I get older and older, though, it's interesting how much of my life is wrapped around what I do for a living, which I had never imagined myself to be that person. But, you know, but that's also, to be honest, that's why I chose to do something like that.
You chose to pursue a career in your passion. That's what happens.
Exactly. And it has largely taken over now, and it affects everything.
There is no rest from passion.
No, that's absolutely true. And it's just kind of shocking sometimes to realize how much it rules over my life.
It consumes. One quick question at the end. Your advice to young writers. One advice to young writers.
Well, this one is something I've said before, but I think it's really crucial. And that is, it actually springs off of something I was saying earlier. It is super, super important, especially if you're going to be a genre writer, meaning, you know, if you're going to write mysteries, crime, romance, science fiction, Westerns, you know, historical novels. Don't just read those kinds of books. You know, read many kinds of fiction and lots of nonfiction as well. Even for fiction writers who are not even going near real life events or real life history, it is crucial to have an understanding of how the world works, at least as we currently understand it. But more importantly, I think the problem with genre fiction, which can be absolutely wonderful, is that genre fiction is also a set of restraints. It's a set of curbs or barriers. It's like, I don't know if you guys have this in Croatia. You guys do regular type bowling, right?
We
do you
do.
have that? Okay. In America, you know, when you're like taking kids bowling or something, they will put up the barriers in the gutters, right? So that no ball actually goes into the gutter. I personally hate it, but it's very similar to what genre fiction is. It's like you can do anything you want as long as you stay within these boundaries. Now, the problem, though, is that if you only read other people who are staying within the boundaries, not only are you not being cross-fertilized by other more varied kinds of storytelling and by more varied kinds of art, but you're also in this kind of incestuous circle of people who are writing the same thing that you want to write, and they learned from other people who were writing the same kind of thing, who learned from other people writing the. So what you have is not people bringing in the great wide world of storytelling and human interaction, but you're getting down this increasingly narrow alley of doing what other people did, but varying it slightly, you know, varying it a little bit. But you're not saying, why do I have to do anything like that at all? Why not bring in something completely from outside the genre, or completely out of, you know, completely out of the obvious thing that everybody would think, or whatever, you know? You're limiting yourself, you're narrowing your focus. So that's my first thing for readers is, you know, please, whatever you do, read a lot of different kinds of fiction. Don't concentrate on just reading one thing, because that will channelize your imagination, and it also will keep you from understanding how widespread fiction can be and how many different ways you can work with it. Then the other thing is just try to work on something regularly. It doesn't have to be daily, but what a regular schedule of trying to do some writing is about, and this is true with any art, is it starts to regularize your thinking about that process. So if you're working on a story and you know you're going to be back sitting at your computer in a week or 3 days or whatever, you can start thinking about what you're going to work on long before you're actually working. And you begin to develop that habit of thinking about what you're doing. Because to my mind, the hardest way to write is to sit down in front of a blank page or a blank screen and start from scratch. What I think is much easier and much more satisfying is to think about, what is it that I want to do? Okay, so if I am going to start a new story, what's it about? What viewpoint? Okay, but why? You know, and all that kind of stuff, which the great thing about that is you can do that while you're doing another job, or while you're walking your dog, or playing with your kids, or
doing the dishes, like Agatha Christie said.
Absolutely, doing the dishes. In my case, it's also driving is really good, because it uses just enough of my conscious brain that I can kind of float and fly. That's my version of Agatha Christie's dishes, but it's the same basic process. So I'd say those are the two main things: is don't ignore all the other kinds of fiction, and in fact expand your palette, and then also, you know, do something regularly so that it becomes a part of your life. Even if you can't write every day or whatever, that's fine. Just do it regularly enough that it becomes part of your thinking process, and that will also make it easier and more satisfying.
Those are really great advices. Ted, thank you so much for this. This was a pleasure. Incredible pleasure. Thank you so much. I really hope that we see you soon in Croatia, in Opatija.
I hope so too. So please, what's the word? Hvala?
Hvala.
Hvala. Okay.
Great.
The H and the V were close. I thought they were one word. So Hvala.
It's hvala. It's like close. Yeah.
Okay.
But with H.
And I wanted to say, thanks to everybody at Liburnicon for being so kind to me last year. And, I will see you all next year, I hope, or soon thereafter, depending on how we get along with the pandemic.
Right. Thank you so much. Have a great day and see you soon.
Okay. Do widzenia.
Do widzenia.